Republican Party is or has been or has sold itself as the law and order party, the party of family values and the party of business. But in our fourth story tonight, if you want to know how the new emerging Republican Tea Party prioritizes these things, you might look to Wisconsin. There, businessman Ron Johnson is running as a family man, a Washington outsider who doesn't have experience with lawsuits like all those D.C. lawyers do. Turns out he does know about some lawsuits. This is a picture of John Feeney, a former priest transferred from the Green Bay Diocese to Nevada after allegations of child abuse. In 2008, a victim of his in Nevada sued the Green Bay Diocese for covering up Feeney's past and moving him on to prey on new victims. What does this have to do with Johnson? He sat on the Green Bay Diocese Finance Council, the body that manages its books and signs off on its lawsuit settlements. The head of the Finance Council, on which Johnson sat, was Auxiliary Bishop Robert Morneau, who was long ago blamed for relocating Feeney time after time in Green Bay. Today, in response to a news conference held by abuse victims, Johnson, now running for the Senate on the Republican ticket in Wisconsin, called on the diocese, quote, to provide the utmost transparency. But in January, Johnson had testified against the bipartisan child abuse victims bill, which would have eliminated the statute of limitations, preventing abuse victims from suing much later on. When you watch his testimony, keep in mind that Johnson was still on the Finance Council, facing that Nevada lawsuit over Feeney, neither of which Johnson mentions.
Chairperson, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Ron Johnson. I'm a business owner in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The first question I asked myself when I was made aware of this legislation was, what is its purpose? On its face, it appears it is intended to financially compensate victims of past sexual abuse. The reason I am here today is to discuss the many unintended consequences this legislation might produce. I think it is extremely important to consider the economic havoc and the other victims it would likely create. I've listed the many organizations I am currently involved with below, hopefully to demonstrate my direct knowledge of the struggles that nonprofit organizations face on a daily basis. With the $50,000 cap on damages from public institutions, it is obvious that any lawsuits under this bill would be directed at private organizations, and any private organization servicing children would be at risk. We all share a deep sense of sympathy for anyone affected by these crimes, and the punishment for the actual perpetrators should be severe. But I believe it is a valid question to ask whether the employer of a perpetrator should also be severely damaged, possibly destroyed in our legitimate desire for justice. What type of organizations am I talking about? A brief listing would include any and all private schools, boys and girls clubs, YMCAs, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, and churches of all denominations. Less obvious would be private businesses and organizations that donate employee time to teach and mentor students in and out of a classroom environment. As the business co-chair of the Oshkosh Chamber Partners in Education Council, one of our primary goals is to help facilitate these contacts between students and businesses. This legislation could make private businesses that generously donated employee time in the past vulnerable to future action, and would also send a very chilling signal to avoid this civic-minded activity in the future. I think it is also valid to ask, after a long, emotionally draining, and very expensive legal process, what are the chances the victims would receive any meaningful compensation? I have no doubt that trial lawyers would benefit. I'm not so sure the actual victims would. I simply don't see the big pots of money available this bill must assume exists. So who are the other victims that could be the result of this legislation? First and foremost would be the children and individuals who will no longer benefit from the organizations that are damaged or destroyed in this process. Second, the many wonderful and dedicated individuals that devote their lives to servicing their fellow man through these fine organizations. Third, to the extent that organizations have built endowments to fund future operations, those that generously gave to support the good work would see their donations diverted to an entirely different purpose. Any organization that relies on fundraising would suffer, as this would make their fundraising efforts significantly more difficult. And finally, this bill could actually have the perverse effect of leading to additional victims of sexual abuse if individuals, recognizing that their organizations are at risk, become less likely to report sexual abuse. I'm a confirmed Lutheran that has agreed to serve on the boards of Catholic and other nonprofit organizations because I strongly support their important missions. The people I work with in these organizations are fine, decent human beings, working hard to help improve people's lives. I urge you to defeat this legislation so that we can all continue to benefit from their good and noble work. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson's high-speed sophistry succeeded. The bill failed. The Green Bay Diocese then asked to have that Nevada suit dismissed because it had exceeded the statute of limitations. Last week, the Nevada Supreme Court said the suit can go forward. We're joined now by one of the people abused by Feeney in the diocese, Todd Merrifield, whose abuse was allegedly known to the diocese when they transferred Feeney to Las Vegas. Mr. Merrifield, thank you for your courage coming forward and for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me on.
If we erred in summarizing the facts here, please let me know, and if you could otherwise amplify what you know, especially about what this Senate candidate, Mr. Johnson, would have known throughout this process.
Well, frankly, Keith, I found out about everything last night near about 10 o'clock. I've been a huge Johnson supporter since he announced his candidacy, and I'll tell you, last night I was taken aback at his position on this.
What was your reaction when you saw it? I mean, you described it in a kind of in a political sense and how it will affect you going forward. But on a personal level, if we can ask you just to whatever degree you want to answer that question, how did you feel when you heard this man saying these things? Because even as somebody as remote from the equation as myself listening to it, it seemed like some pretty mediocre arguments against protecting kids from pedophiles.
Oh, if it wasn't so tragic, Keith, it would be laughable. You know, when you hear, you know, the concern that the victims won't get much of the money if this would have passed, you know, that it would all go to the lawyers. Why is he so concerned that the victims would get a smaller amount? And his statement about the perverse effect that there would actually be more abuse. Come on. No, that's not going to happen. The organizations, the victims are not going to worry about the organization's inability to raise funds in the future. They're worried about their own personal well-being at that time. In my brother and my case, we didn't sit back and wonder, oh gosh, we shouldn't do something against the Catholic Church. I mean, we needed to deal with it ourselves.
Well, and the other one that I wanted to ask you about was his point that I think it is also valid to ask, after a long, emotionally draining and very expensive legal process, what are the chances victims would receive any meaningful compensation, as if the only reason anyone would sue or try to get a priest removed from his position of trust and authority was for the money.
I will tell you, Keith, it is not about the money. When my brother and I took up the criminal case against Feeney, in fact, we still get phone calls from victims around the country that they are in serious pain, and because of the legal system, they have not been able to get their ounce of justice. That they look to us almost as heroes. That, you know, they call us, and you almost start crying hearing their stories, and they are looking to us to get their ounce of justice. And we did our best. Well, we put the priest in jail, so we did our very best on that. And the Catholic Church, the Green Bay Diocese specifically, just continues to shirk their duty to do the right thing.
We asked Mr. Johnson's office today if he stands by that testimony from earlier in the year, but he did not respond to that question. But he did issue a statement today, which, as I said, called on the diocese to show the utmost transparency. A, do you have any idea what he means by that? And B, what's your reaction to the nature of that statement?
Well, gee, the Green Bay Diocese has been talking transparency for quite some time now, and there are 51 individuals out there that they refuse to release the identities of that have had allegations against them. They may be active clergy members out in the community. Somebody may be being abused as we speak right now, and we don't know. So for complete transparency to have happened, I guess we need to have a definition of complete transparency. As far as Mr. Johnson making that statement, it seems a little light. If he did not know what had happened, what was being covered up in the diocese, if someone had told you that, and you felt, oh my God, I didn't know this, wouldn't you come out with a very strong statement, just that I was lied to, I was not aware of this, and I'm ashamed of the diocese, and they need to open up their books right now. But to come out with this weak response of, you know, just that they need to come out with complete transparency, that doesn't show the outrage that I would expect from someone in his position on something that is so critical.
Especially
this Child's Victims Act.
Especially when he just got a second opportunity to say something about it and chose not to. Todd Merrifield, again. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, and you kind of tapped into it, this is a great opportunity for Mr. Johnson to come out and, for lack of a better term, have his come to Jesus moment and say, you know what, I reconsider what I stated in that testimony, and I am going to be very forceful and do whatever I can to make the Catholic diocese, or the Green Bay Diocese, come through and do the right thing and to help out all these victims out there.
Indeed. Todd Merrifield, well spoken. Again, thank you for your time and for being as public with this as you've been.
Thank you.